This is Learn from Others, where we interview a cross-section of successful individuals so you can learn from their experiences, achievements, and even their mistakes. We ask 4 questions that will educate and inspire. Greg Stanley will be your guide as we join our guest on a journey from adolescent daydreaming to success in today's world. Join us on this adventure as we learn from others together.
Welcome to Learn from Others, where we help others succeed by sharing success. I'm very excited to introduce our special guest, Hannah Ryan. Hannah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you for taking us on your career journey. But before we find out what you're doing today, let's start at the very beginning. And would you tell us, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a lot of different things. I went through a phase where I wanted to be a veterinarian, and I grew up on a farm, so I've always loved animals, and so I was very passionate about helping animals. And that sort of transitioned for me into considering the medical field, and so I went through a phase where I really wanted to be a doctor. And all the while, though, I was involved in the performing arts, and I was putting together plays and skits for my family with my cousins in my living room, and I just didn't really realize that directing in the theater was a career option. Like, to me, and my lack of exposure to the arts, I just categorized theater as acting and performing. And so I just didn't really recognize at a young age that my skill set really fit the field of directing. It wasn't until I got into college and I recognized that. So I didn't identify that as a child. So I was more in the realm of caring for others, like whether it be taking care of animals or taking care of people.
Did you have pets on the farm? Like, did you have a duck or something a little unusual as a pet growing up on the farm?
I did have lots of animals. My favorite thing were sheep, and I would show sheep at the fair. I was involved in 4-H and then later FFA. FFA, Future Farmers of America, I actually would show cows at the fair. But with 4-H, I would show my sheep. But I was very spoiled. I was the only girl, and I was the youngest. So my dad would drag me to the auctions where they would sell livestock, and I would eventually persuade him to buy whatever animal I was interested in raising. So I had goats, I had pigs that would often have babies. So I had a nice variety of animals growing up, but dogs were always my favorite. I always had several dogs as we had land in a farm, so we were able to take care of some rescues that would come stay with us.
So what was the name of your favorite lamb?
Oh, that's easy. Buddy. I had a lamb named Buddy who grew up to be an adult sheep, and I had him for, probably 8 years, and we had a leather collar around his neck with a big brass bell, and he would come running to me when I would run up to the fence. He was completely tame, and I had tamed him as a young lamb, so he remembered me his whole adult life.
So Buddy the lamb.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yep. And I also had a little chicken, a little baby chick that I hatched in 3rd grade that came home to stay with me, and his name was Peeper.
Peeper. Mm-hmm. That's a great name for a little chicken. That's cool. Well, what was your first job? One where you felt like you had like some responsibilities and wanted to perform well?
Yeah, well, I of course grew up on the farm, so I was always busy and helping my dad with chores around the farm. So I learned pretty early on the importance of a work ethic. But my grandparents, my dad's parents, were actually carnies. And my grandma, who is 86 years old today, is still on the route with an ice cream trailer. She's
oh my
still
gosh.
carny. Yes. So my first job where I actually got a paycheck was spending summers with my grandparents on a carnival route that they would take for 9 months out of the year all through the Midwest. So I spent a lot of time in Bloomington, Indiana, working. They had a elephant ear trailer that I often worked in, as well as a sausage trailer and an ice cream trailer. And then my grandpa had an arcade. So I would spend 2 to 4 weeks each summer working with them and learning at a very young age the importance of, counting change and customer service and just like keeping a space tidy and as professional as possible.
So we could have a whole other conversation just on the life of a carny, for lack of a better phrase.
Yep. Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure that's totally fascinating, being in the traveling world like that. So, wow, that's really cool. What were some of your favorite subjects or hobbies in school? It sounds like theater was probably one of them.
Yep, definitely theater. I loved lit, like any literature classes I could take, and I was an avid reader as a young kid. I also loved history, and I didn't necessarily enjoy studying history as much in school, though the older I got, the more interesting that became to me. But when I was young, I would read a lot, so I would read a lot of different genres of history. So I would kind of go through phases. Like I read every book that was ever written on Helen Keller for one phase, and then I moved on to the American Revolution. And so I had different phases of interest as I grew older through, I would say primarily American history. And I also loved math. I was really good at math. And I think part of my organization and skill set as a director, which has, especially as a resident director, lends itself a lot to stage management, says a lot about my interest in accomplishments in math.
Well, that's really cool. It's interesting you said history. That leads us right into the next question. What are you doing today?
So I'm a freelance theater director, but my primary job is serving as the resident director of Hamilton on Broadway. And my main responsibility there is to maintain the artistic integrity of the show. So making sure that when an audience comes in on a nightly basis, they're seeing the same show that the original creators intended for the show to be, as well as directing all new company members. So as soon as a contract runs up or someone chooses to leave the show, we'll hire a new actor, go through the full casting process, and then get them ready for their opening night and their life after in the show. So I'm constantly teaching new actors new characters and new tracks and getting them performance ready.
Okay, I will have some more questions related to that, but how did you get there? Like, could you walk us through your career path from school up until that position? And then even if you go over like the interview process or kind of the steps you took to get to where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, I didn't have a lot of exposure to theater growing up in rural Ohio. I really only knew musicals through VHSs, like whatever was available at my local library. So I watched The Music Man and Sound of Music, but they were all the film versions of the shows. And so I loved them and I was immediately interested, but I didn't know what all existed within a career in musical theater. And so I performed. That was what I knew to do. But I'm a terrible singer. So I would always get the biggest speaking role with the least amount of singing in every musical that I performed in.
Did you know you were a terrible singer, or did someone have to tell you? You did?
It was
okay.
a bit of both, yes. My mom was actually a performer her entire childhood, and she's incredible, and she sings in choirs and has continued singing all through her adult life. My dad's terrible, so I inherited my dad's singing voice. So I think between my parents telling me, and me being attuned to the fact that I wasn't getting any better was a sure sign. But I was still passionate about theater, so I still did all the straight plays and acted all through my childhood. And it wasn't until I then studied theater in school. I went through a phase of my transition from high school to college and trying to figure out what I should study, considering nursing, which I think is part of the like early excitement and seed being planted of possibly being a doctor. And so I looked into the medical field, and my dad and my parents both were pretty like encouraging of the stability of that. But I always still had this passion for theater. So I went back and forth between the two. I ended up finally majoring in theater and began by acting. So I continued performing like I had been doing. And then my junior year, the fall semester of my junior year, I studied abroad in London. And it was there that I saw an incredible array of theater. And most of it was reinterpreted classics, which I was lucky enough to see at the National Theatre in London and the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford-upon-Avon. And I fell in love with contemporizing classic works and as well as new works. And I saw 3 wonderful productions that were directed by women. And that sort of became like a pivotal moment for me in recognizing both my skill set and also that this was a possibility for a woman, that a woman could like lead the charge and have a creative idea, have a vision, and then bring it to life on stage. So that really set me upon that path. I came back to San Diego where I was in college. I switched my focus from acting to directing. I was disappointed by the lack of productions that my college offered, so I began to work at a community theater in San Diego and just found every opportunity and directed like crazy those first few years of living in San Diego outside of college, and have never really stopped. So I just kind of hit the ground running once I recognized, okay, this is where my talent lies and this is what I'm passionate about. And I've honestly never regretted the switch from acting to directing. It's just always felt like the right fit for me.
Was there a particular moment where you were an actor and you just saw what the director was doing, and like was there a particular moment that you were like, that is really interesting? or was it a gradual thing?
I think it was gradual. I think definitely being in London and recognizing like the ideas that I was seeing executed on stage were ideas that I felt like I'd either had before or were inspired by and thought that's something I could do, like recognizing that. But I also remember being a performer and in rehearsal and I was just so bored. I would be sitting back in the back of the theater, like in my back row, like, if I was in a musical, I was definitely more ensemble based, and redirecting the scene in my head, like, oh, actually, I would do it this way, and that costume should be on that character, and why is the set that color, and sort of overly analyzing it. And sometimes would be vocal about it, and I honestly, probably looking back on it now, drove my directors crazy because they probably would have liked for me to have just done what was asked of me, but instead I would question. I don't think I was happy as a performer. I think I was always feeling complacent. So
when you were making these recommendations, were you like pedestrian number 4, or were you one of the named actors or actresses?
A bit of both.
Front? A bit of both. Okay.
Yeah, a bit of both, depending on the production. If it was a musical, I was definitely pedestrian number 4, no doubt.
Okay.
And those were probably the hardest moments because I had less to do creatively, or I felt less involved.
Wow. Well, that's really great that you realized what was not for you. At the same time, you saw what you felt was for you and would be a new passion for you to keep you engaged and striving for the next best thing. So that's really cool. Well, I know you talked a little bit about the job there pretty quick, but could you walk us through kind of like a week in the life of? I used to do a day in the life of, but that was just a little too hard to do. So how about a week?
Yeah, a week in the life. That's a great question. And the wonderful thing for me, and the reason why I am now in my 3rd year on Hamilton and hope many more, is that no one week is the same. It's always different. It's completely based on what's going on in the company, what the structure of the cast is at that particular moment, what the needs are on a weekly basis. So some days I'm at the theater at noon is typically my start time if I have rehearsal. Sometimes I'm not in until 6 or 7 at night if I'm just going to watch the show. And having that like buffer of time and that inconsistency really allows me to also be developing projects of my own. So I have about 3 musicals in the works that are nearing the production phase and about 5 to 8 straight plays or different ideas that are either like just an idea that needs to be written or like fully written and nearing draft number 10 or whatever. So various phases of development. So that flexibility of schedule that I have at Hamilton really allows me to continue developing pieces, spend a lot of time on the phone or in meetings with other playwrights, and really be working towards the creation of some original stories.
Well, that's really cool. So from a Hamilton perspective, are you contracted? Like, how does that work? Is everybody contracted for Hamilton? I know you mentioned sometimes like an actor, their contract would be up. So now you're transitioning into someone new that you have to get up to speed. Is everyone pretty much contracted out? I'm not familiar with.
Yeah. Everyone is unionized on Broadway, so the cast is part of the Actors Equity Union, and so they have a set contract, and it's typically 6 months or a year in terms of length, and then when you reach that period, you are offered to extend or you choose to leave. So when we first casted like a new original company, we go for the 1 year, like that way everyone's up at the same time, or everyone's staying or sticking around at the same time, or you only have X amount of contracts to fill. And then within that contract, they're of course required to perform 8 shows a week. That's how many shows we do in a week. And then I believe it's up to 20 hours of rehearsal time, depending on what the necessity of that is. But we typically would go nowhere close to the max amount of rehearsal time. We tend to rehearse Thursdays during the day and Fridays during the day. And so those become like days where you just kind of keep it blacked out in case you do have a work through or a run through with a new cast member that's coming in if you're an existing cast member. So that's typically like 4 hours each of those days. So, and then of course if we needed more than that, you would be swung out of the show so that you could rehearse in the evening. But that's usually for an actor who's going to be playing multiple characters, who'd be learning another character throughout the week.
So they do that. Oh, yeah. I swear I've seen that guy before.
Yeah, most of our swings, we have ensemble swings, and the male ensemble swings cover 6 parts, so they could play 6 different dance tracks. And then I have a lot of offstage covers that I work with that will cover multiple principal roles. One of the actors I was working with last month just learned his 6th track of a principal character track on Broadway. So Yeah, they stay very busy. And it just depends on the person and what their skill set is and what their interest is and whether they want to cover multiple roles and they want to challenge themselves in that way, or if they're busy enough, because if other people do have other things going on outside the building too. So they all have a different balance of work life.
And now when you go there to watch a performance, do you vary where you sit, and then what are you looking
Great
for?
question. Yeah, I do. I try to go every other side. So if I'm watching, say, on Tuesday night, I'll sit on the house right side. And then if I'm watching, say, Friday, I'll sit on the house left side. And I try to vary my depth as much as I can, too. Obviously, the closer you are, the more bits of intimacy you can see in terms of an actor's facial expression or their connection with another character and their scene partner. And I'm looking for a lot of things. One of the main things is spacing. Like, our show is very lighting specific, and so there are a lot of tight light cues, and so if an actor's one dance number off, or which would be the equivalent of 2 feet, that could very easily put them either on the edge of their light or out of their light. So we have along the apron of our stage what we call dance numbers that are like spaced 2 feet apart that allow us to see, or give a nice indication of proximity to a particular light cue. So I'm looking a lot for that. And it's also important to keep an eye always on safety to make sure, and that would be specific to traffic, like making sure an actor is following the same traffic each time so that they're not running into another actor. And then all of the intention work that comes with playing a character. So making sure that what they're saying and the way in which they're saying it, the inflection they're using, is in line with the text that we're playing on a nightly basis. And so, and the wonderful thing about our show and the fact that so many actors play so many different characters within a single company, there is a lot of room for freedom. So there is freedom for interpretation. I just help guide them and help them make choices that feel in line with the character that we've worked to develop.
I find that very interesting that there's freedom. I never thought of it that way because I always thought, it's the same exact every single time. I mean, obviously the big plot points are, and, the major points, you need to have that. But so I'm sure that's great from an audience perspective, because you'll see a little bit of changes if you go see it frequently, but then also from an actor's perspective.
Absolutely.
To keep
yeah,
it
you'll
fresh.
see a different show on Broadway every night depending on who's on, as well as if you see it in Chicago or on the road or now on the West End. And now in Puerto Rico, you're going to see, like you said, the structure and the bones of the piece are the same, but there is a lot of room for interpretation, which makes my job incredibly exciting.
Are you the resident director for both Broadway and Chicago?
When I first came on, I was responsible for Broadway Chicago and the first national tour, along with Patrick Vassell, who was the original associate. He and I sort of split responsibilities with all three. As the first year progressed and the tour was entirely on the West Coast, that became a little more challenging for us both to be in a lot of places. So I then took on the tour and Broadway, and we split Broadway. He did Chicago and Broadway. So for the whole first year of my time with Hamilton, actually more like a year and a half, I was bi-coastal. I would spend 2 to 6 weeks in San Francisco and then come back for 2 to 4 weeks in New York and back and forth all year long. Now I'm just with the Broadway company, which allows me some more freedom, like I was saying, to develop my own pieces and keep my feet in both pools of water.
If you had to take a guess, in 3 years, how many times have you seen Hamilton from start to finish?
Oh, my goodness. Early days, I would average, when it was a new company on the road, I would average watching it about 4 times a week. Now I'm down to about 2 to 3. So, gosh, I can't do the math that quick. A lot of times.
All right, 50 weeks in a year. So you're talking probably upwards of 150 to 200 times you've seen it start to finish, I would assume.
Easy. And then we throw in all the tech rehearsals we've had and run-throughs and put-ins, and I'm thinking several hundred at this point.
So when is the one-woman version popping up on Broadway?
Oh, I can't wait. I hope to be involved. Or the all-female cast. I can't wait for
the all-female cast.
Yeah.
As a reminder, you can check out all previous episodes at learnfromothers.org. If you're an educator or a student, you can search for podcasts by career cluster, and additional resources are under the resource tab. Hannah, we just learned what you wanted to be when you grew up and what you actually do today. So if you could do it all over again, what would you do differently?
I don't think I'd do too much differently. I'm very happy. I feel very fortunate to be where I am and working on the show that I'm working on, that no matter the day, no matter what's going on in our world, continues to be relevant, which is such a testament to the quality of the writing. Yeah, I feel pretty fortunate. I mean, I went down a lot of different paths to get here based on advice that different mentors in my life gave me along the way, and I continue to ride this wave, and I plan to stay on it until get kicked off. So I'm pretty happy with my path.
Well, I know someone in our audience wants to do what you do. So what advice would you give them?
I mean, one thing I wish I had done early on in terms of just allowing me to expedite my process and be even more efficient, or to have learned more quickly, would be to be less competitive. I think at an early age I sort of had this like feisty, must prove myself type energy that I think most young people do. And I wish I had recognized then that there's room for all of us in this career. Like it is a competitive field, but there is no limit to the amount of stories that can be told. And so knowing, like, understanding and appreciating the art of collaboration that exists within theater to allow me to have worked even more comfortably with other people at an early age. I wish I had been aware of that.
That's really wise advice, because I think everybody, including myself, when you first get started, you feel like you have this, I got to succeed quickly,
Mm-hmm.
So it just makes you like really competitive. When looking back after so many years of experience, if you're good, things are going to happen anyways.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
and in talking,
that's really good advice.
Yeah, and in talking to mentors or people I've worked with on multiple shows, I've also learned so much that it's less about what you do and more about how you do it. Like my work ethic and my ability to connect and be kind to people has pushed me further than the wonderful artistic idea I had in the room at that moment.
Well, are there any current projects you're working on that you would like to share? And I know that they are. There are.
There are, yeah. I'm working on several new musicals. One straight play that I'm developing actually was picked up this year for 2019 by the Drama League, which I am an alumni of their Directors Project program. And so that piece is a verbatim theater piece about the LGBTQ community in New York City from the era of Stonewall through the Mark Carson shooting in 2013. So I'm developing that through the lens of a docudrama to make it a little more active. And it's a really extraordinary piece because so much of the process and my development of it has been based on the cast and the cast of actors in the room. So the original piece was based off of 6 New Yorker stories, and now the newest draft and the new incarnation of the piece is the 6 original characters plus the 6 actors performing those roles. So it's kind of got a new life to it, and will just allow those actors to make it even more personal because now they're also telling their own stories. So I'm excited to explore that and develop that this year with the Drama League. I have the 2 new musicals that I'm developing are both at the phase of production. So we're currently looking for regional theater homes for those. One thing a lot of people don't know is how long it takes to develop a new musical. So I joined both of those pieces around 2 years ago, and they were each being written and developed 3 years prior to that. So by the time I actually am involved in a production of either of those, they'll be about 6 years old.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Could you walk just briefly through that process? It sounds like you're really versed in it. You always hear of Broadway, off-Broadway. I mean, it sounds like, I don't know, could you just walk through it? Because, I mean, you need to find a place to land in which to perform and the steps it takes to ramp up a musical like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So usually the idea comes first, and I've seen that come from all kinds of people. I've seen that be director-based, I've seen it be writer-based, and I've seen it be composer-based. Like I'm about to start and on a new project with a really good friend of mine, Charlie Sutton, who's a choreographer, and he happened to watch this film and came to me with this idea. And so that's an example of the choreographer having the idea. So it could really come from anyone. But basically what we begin with is the idea, and then you'll assemble your team. So say in the case of Charlie, he then came to me and said, would you direct this piece and help me develop it? And now he and I are looking for the composer. So, and in this case, the screenwriter is interested in writing, so he'll then become the book writer. So you assemble your team once you have the idea, and then you sort of, at least for me as a director, you step away and allow the writers to create. And then at a certain point, they'll feel comfortable and ready and prepared to share that with you. And so, like I said, with these other two musicals, were being worked on 3 years before I stepped in. So that was just the time where the writers sat in a room and discussed structure, discussed song choice. So like by the time I was involved 3 years in, and I've been involved for 2 years, I think just in my time on the show alone, we've already cut or changed like 8 to 10 songs.
Oh, wow.
It takes a lot of sacrifice. Like in all those cases, that composer spent hours upon hours upon hours on those songs, and maybe in that particular draft, they just didn't serve the story in the way that another song could, or in the way that a book scene could. So you choose to lose that song, or you choose to write a new scene. And so it's a lot of give and take, and it's a lot of collaboration. Like I mentioned earlier, the strength in that collaboration. It's a lot of trusting other people's ideas and being bold enough to share yours. It's all about arguing too. Like you have to fight for an idea you believe in, and ultimately someone wins that fight. And that's what exists in the draft. But the wonderful thing about being with a caring group of people is, though you sort of duke it out, you still support each other and keep the interest of the story as the momentum that pushes you forward, the best interest of the story.
So when you get it all together, for lack of a better word, are you then trying to find a location? And once you get the location, you start hiring people?
A little bit backwards. The next step would be then to get in a room with actors, because that's going to breathe life into the piece like four writers in a room never would. So you hire a cast of actors, and you typically would do what we would just call cold reading, which would be just to get them in the room, sit down with scripts in front of them, and hear it out loud. And in that setting, usually the composer is going to sing the music, because the actors will just be walking in and seeing the words on the page for the first time. So that would be like a cold, rough reading. And then from there, you would go away, make a bunch of changes. And then the sort of next step would be a 29-hour reading, which is an equity term for the type of contract you're using, which allows a director to work with a cast for up to 29 hours.
Okay.
And so typically with that, if it's a musical, your primary focus is going to be teaching the cast the music, so that by the time you complete and you get people in a room to see it, and the writers can actually see it come to life, the actors have a handle on the music. And so that allows you to really hear it in its full form.
Right.
Or at least the direction you're headed. Yeah. Then from there, typically what you want to do with those 29-hour readings is get producers in from local theaters, or, have demos created so you can send them to producers, because your next big phase is going to be, in my opinion, people do it differently, but I think it's really beneficial to take it out of town, take it out of New York City, take it to a regional theater like San Diego or Seattle or Miami or Atlanta. There's so many wonderful regional theater cities where they have incredibly intelligent audiences, and they're sort of experts at providing feedback for new musicals and development. So you can actually get the next component, which is to stage it and get it on feet, and the audience there, that extra character that makes all the difference.
Oh, that's really cool. Never thought about it that way, taking it to a regional to get feedback and kind of tweak it. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay. Well, did you want to talk about Nettleworks a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the side projects that I've been able to work on over the years as a resident director has been this formation of what I call my creative collective. And it's a grouping of 3 women. It's myself as a theater director, my good friend Mary Hadry, who is a poet originally, but now turned playwright. And she also is venturing into fiction writing and working on a novel, as well as my sister-in-law, actually, who is a artist. She's a fine artist, and she specializes in sculpture work. So between the 3 of us, we would constantly get together and just brainstorm and have creative discussions, and realize how many ideas we had that were similar and intersected in a way that made us want to create something. So probably been about 4 years now. We founded our creative collective, and we've produced 2 pieces together, and we're working on a third. They're really wonderful, unusual, unique performance art pieces, because no one genre sort of surpasses the other. Like they're as much gallery performance or gallery fine art as they are performance art, as they are narrative. So all 3 of our interests really intersect in a way that creates one fluid, unique piece. And they range in length. Like the gallery piece we just did recently was really all up to the audience as to how long they wanted to stay. So you could be in there for the full length of the narrative, which was about 25 minutes. The other piece we did was closer to an hour. So it's like a really fun experimental way for me to tell stories that I don't feel are being told. There's specifically stories of womanhood and a woman's journey through life today and contemporary times, which has obviously changed a lot recently with the Me Too movement and Time's Up. So it's an opportunity for us to speak to that using our voices in a unique way.
No, it's really cool and creative and inventive for sure. So that's really neat.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, as with most journeys, success largely depends on reliable transportation. And I'm a huge car enthusiast. I have no idea if you are or not. But could you tell us, what was your first car?
Well, I was incredibly fortunate to get my dream car to begin with. As I mentioned, I would go with my dad to the auctions and get whatever animal I wanted. So my dad reluctantly purchased my dream car, which was a 1972 Volkswagen Bug.
Oh, very nice.
Yes, I loved it. It was bright blue, and I was only able to drive it around my rural community because it would not go above 65 miles per hour. So I think we were lucky to get there. It was pretty much an average of 50. So it was not a highway car. So that didn't last too long. I ended up getting a vintage BMW that was like 1982, I believe.
Oh, that's cool.
Which was still a really fun, reliable car.
That's really cool. Well, what is your dream car? Is it still the VW Bug or is it something else?
I would definitely take a VW Bug, but I would also take a VW camper van.
Oh, yes.
Travel the country. So I'm a big Volkswagen fan.
Get the Westfala that has the one that the top pops up.
The top up, yes. Absolutely.
So.
I would go tour the country and see our national parks in that.
Well, one perk to some jobs is a company car. So if I had all the money in the world, I'd love to buy you a company car based on your job. And I went totally different than what the cars you just said. But my thought process was, and I usually put too much thinking into this, is you're a director. So you're trying to coordinate a lot of different things for success. And so I thought, well, who was the best quote unquote director in automobile history? Bertone. So he's known as a designer. He's an Italian designer, but he really just managed the designers. And so he would make sure that everything worked on the car, everything kind of fulfilled the goals, And the car I picked for you, which is a really wild and crazy car, is a 1965 Lamborghini Miura. Are you familiar with that car at all?
Yes, I'll take it.
Yeah, so that's like the first supercar, and it is the other reason I picked that car, the ones he designed, is because I was thinking of theatrical. This thing is full of drama and style. It's when it shows up, people take notice. It is a beautiful car. It's very artistic. I'll send you some pictures of it so you can see the version I'm talking about. But if I had all the money in the world, that's the car I buy for you.
Thank you. I'll take it.
You take it. Well, thank you so much for taking us on your career journey today. What's the best way for our listeners to learn more about you, Hamilton, or your projects?
Yeah, you can check me out at hannahmryan.com. That's my website. And then also nettleworks.com to learn more about my creative collective.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Hannah.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Learn from Others, where we help others succeed by sharing success. Where will our next adventure take us? Subscribe to find out. If you know of someone who has a cool career story or occupation, contact Greg through Instagram at Greg Stanley LFO. That's GregStanley LFO. And we will see you soon as we learn from others together.